And I think we're in an overthinking period that gets in our way, and it really produces loneliness.
Hello and welcome to the coaching studio. I'm Lyssa deHart, your host, and it is my distinct pleasure today to introduce you to Carrie Sackett. She is a PCC with the International Coaching Federation, and Carrie is also widely known as America's loneliness coach. We're going to talk about that a bit in the conversation today. Carrie has several coaching programs, and they are designed to help you build relational muscles, combat loneliness, and develop emotional resilience. With 25 years of experience, Carrie has practiced a boldly transformative approach, social therapeutics, both in the coach's chair and as a Fortune 500 global change leader, award-winning employee engagement professional, and she specializes in group, couples, and family coaching. She is also the founder of the Center for Group and Couples Coaching to train coaches in this groundbreaking method for emotional wellness and personal growth. Carrie is the co-author of Social Therapeutic Coaching, a practical guide to group and couples work. It was published this year in 2024. Congratulations on that, Carrie. And as a certified social therapeutic coach and somatic coach, her goal is to make emotional growth and relationship building skills accessible to everyone, empowering individuals to become the creators in their own lives. Thank you for coming to the studio today, Carrie. I have been very much looking forward to this, and I'm so happy to have you as a guest on my show today.
Hi, Lyssa. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I too have really been looking forward to our conversation.
I think it's going to be so much fun. So I
Yeah.
really have been playing a lot on the show with this idea of where people start and where they ultimately get to, because you've clearly gotten to someplace. But I'd be really curious, like when you think about like your first real job, what did you start off? Like, where did this start?
Well, the summer that I turned 16, I went to live with my father in Vermont, and I got a job as a retail sales clerk at a local artisan shop that was selling, works by New England artists, potters and woodworkers and things like that. And it was a very small shop. And the woman who ran the shop was really independent spirited, witty, curious, especially curious about young people and how young people saw the world. And she opened up this new idea for me of a way to be a woman in the world. She was very entrepreneurial. And she became a dear friend and mentor to me for the rest of my life, until this day, actually. And her store is still around to this day.
Wow, that's so fun. And I think I mean, honestly, it sounds like there's the relationship between you and your mentor, first
Yeah.
boss, but also just sort of the relationship skills that are required in order to be
Yeah.
even a salesperson, right? I mean, that's just all about relationships. Then can you maybe think about what were the key moments then in this journey from there to where
Yeah.
you find yourself now that maybe guided you or aligned you with your
Yeah.
purpose?
Yeah. Um, well, it turns out, even since I was a girl, I have always been fascinated by the idea of human development and that capacity that we have to grow and transform, even in small ways. And so one place that took me was in college, was to study humanism. And I don't mean humanistic psychology, although I devoured Rollo May in high school, and so I'm sure that's had an impact on me. But I literally mean the 12 and 1300s in Italy, when these secular people like Dante and Petrarch they were rediscovering the ancients, Cicero and Aristotle and Plato. And I found this moment so fascinating and intellectually rich, that they were basically they were trying on clothes of deciding what of these old ideas fit in their time period. And I loved it. And at the same time that I had my head down in the, early Italian Renaissance, I also was looking out into the world and that I was about to become a part of, the big world, and not concerned about things I was seeing. So I was a Northeastern white woman at school in the South, experiencing overt racism for the first time. These were the years of the crack cocaine epidemic that hit the Black community very, very hard. And also there were a series of high-profile police murders that received national attention in those years of Black and brown folks. And all of this impacted on me. And given my training, I thought, I was outraged, and I thought, this is un-American. It's un-American how the Black community is being related to. And so I resolved that when I got out of college, I was going to go look for the innovators who were doing something new in terms of challenging social justice. And it took me a while, but then I found this. Believe it or not, this all comes together. I found
I trust you. I trust you.
I found this multiracial, community-facing grouping of people that were innovating in the two areas that I cared the most about. So one was innovating tactics for Black empowerment, and doing community work, and the other was creating a new approach to human development. And so I went to train with the founders of what today is known as social therapeutics. And I was training with them in the moment that they were putting down on paper the actual intellectual foundations of the approach, and they were getting published in the academic presses. So it was a very rich time. And as I was writing the book, my book, in the first chapters on a history of coaching, I learned that Thomas Leonard was right up the road in the West Village with his team, putting down the core competencies of coaching. So it turns out that social therapeutics and coaching come out of this common moment out of the 60s and 70s where they were built from the bottom up, outside of academic institutions or research labs or with foundation grants or anything like that. So anyway, I was training, ready to go to lead groups and have clients, and I realized I couldn't sit in the same chair in the same room all day long. I was like too young. I had to get out. And so I took the method out with me into the corporate world and built a successful career in change management and employee engagement that today are part of coaching, but back then were not.
Mm-hmm.
While I was doing that, I continued to do my community building work, specializing in bringing together people who don't normally come together. Those are groups. And of course, change management is group work and employee engagement is group work. And then after, I had a great run in the corporate world, and then started feeling the calling back to my roots, really, just to come back and build a practice. And then as I looked up back out into the world, then I found coaching. And it was wonderful. It was like finding a cousin that I didn't know that I had. And all these, maybe we can talk about it, but there's these real similarities and overlaps between social therapeutics and coaching. And here I am.
Well, and I think that, and that's lovely. And I really love this idea of how this curiosity that you had your younger curiosity around this sort of time period where people were finding the old masters and old wisdom and reinventing it for the present. It is just it is what innovation is, right? It's the building upon the past and bringing forward something with a new lens and for a new generation or generations. Yeah.
Yeah.
So before we dive into to the sort of the kind of the way that social therapeutics works within coaching and how it's aligned so clearly with coaching. In the introduction, America's Loneliness Coach is a moniker that is quite interesting. What led, like, speak about that?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I learned through training in social therapeutics was how to be a methodologist. And what's really struck me in all of, loneliness is high profile. It's a high profile social issue. 1 in 5 Americans will say on surveys that they feel lonely often or even more often. And so it's out there in the world. And we have the Surgeon General on it also. But then they're
Right.
like, hey, now what do we do? We know
Mhm.
we have this issue. And then in general, what's being offered up are real, you could take a pill, you can go talk to strangers, you can join a club of something that you love to do. And I'm all for, I love talking to strangers. I did it for so many years. And I love doing things with others, things that I'm passionate about doing. And those suggestions are individual based, but
Right.
we have a social crisis. So it's a methodological mismatch. We need new conceptual tools that help us see and relate to groups in order to address the loneliness crisis. It's going to be, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just making an observation, honestly, because I think about what you just said, which I really want to put a pin in it, which is somebody comes to you, I'm so lonely. And as you said, I mean, the Surgeon General, we have a crisis of loneliness in our country. I don't think
Yeah,
we're alone. I think there are a lot of countries that are, especially
yeah,
in the Western world, that have a crisis of loneliness, how we live our individualistic sort of experience. Nothing wrong with it, but there are downsides to it as well, which are that especially something comes along like COVID and you become siloed and you maybe don't have, you just don't have the circles and support and resources around you, resources being people that you really like. And so I guess what it brought up for me is this idea that we often are like, here's the prescription, go find a friend, go start getting involved in activities, go find a group you like, go get involved in your community. And those are the prescriptions for loneliness. And to your point, it's way too individualistic of an issue because everybody comes to it, I would assume, in their own unique way
yeah,
and with their own unique, whatever, small t trauma, big T trauma that goes with how we engage in relationships. And so I think that's really interesting to think about, like, how do we begin to get beyond the sort of prescriptive how to solve loneliness and into that sort of client generated solution to their own loneliness.
yeah, yes. And I think that one thing that we all need help with is building up our relational muscles. It's like they're atrophying our capacity to engage with others and build meaningful connections. So when in my work and in social therapeutics, we work to help clients build up those relational muscles. And it's like practicing. And that's why group work is so powerful, because you get to practice
Yeah.
with others, and we create an environment in which we're allowed to babble, we're allowed to practice. That's part of the culture of the work. And then people discover that they can do that. They can build with others without knowing beforehand what they're going to say in the moment, and it emerges in a more authentic way. And when
Yeah.
they can do that, they discover their power.
Yeah, that sense of, I mean, I think it's like anything where the first time you're playing, like building that muscle, it isn't comfortable, right? And so how do you just sort of breathe through the discomfort so that it gets to a place where it does just become organic to chit chat with a stranger, even though you don't really know them and it may not be a long-term relationship, but in that moment, as you're standing in the grocery store having that random conversation with the person checking you out or the person behind you or whatever, you're
Yeah.
still building that muscle of how you intersect and interact with people in the world around you.
And those muscles then also get exercised in work relationships, in personal relationships, in family relationships, where people experience being more connected to the people that they're already with. And I would, there's kind of 4 pillars of social therapeutics. One is the tools of theater and improv, and they really incorporating them into the work. I know we coaches are now training in improv, and I know you had guests on last season,
Yes.
and everyone should do it. It changed my
Yeah,
life
Amy and Betsy.
to coach. And I bring those tools into the work. So there are moments, it's not formulaic, but things will emerge in the work where doing an improv exercise supports people to stretch beyond themselves, try a new line.
And just play with rolling with what
Yeah,
comes towards you,
yeah,
it's the whole yes and, right? Like I could just throw anything at you, like, what do you think about that brown squirrel that just ran across your head, and you're like, yes, and it's so funny how it leaped right onto your face, Lyssa, right? And like you're just sort of playing with it and just being willing to, regardless of the whatever's tossed at you, to be willing to catch it,
yeah,
juggle it and toss it back,
yeah,
and be in that kind of relationship with people.
yeah. I think what you're saying is so important because improv gets us out of thinking. And I think we're in an overthinking period that gets in our way, and it really produces loneliness because we're always in our head
Yeah.
evaluating what we just said or did is what we should have said and done, or we're in our head thinking we know what the other person thinks. That creates loneliness because we're only in our head. When you build relational muscles, you're recognizing that we're here together building something. So you're looking a different place.
It's so interesting. I just did a presentation on Tuesday, and I mean, I love metaphors, and that's sort of
Yeah.
my focus. And people, one of the things that I noticed in the chat was there were people who really get that playfulness of it and the exploration and the curiosity, and what you're talking about, which is this not assuming we know from our lens and being like stuck in our own head about meaning and what's good, bad, right, wrong, what should or should not happen. And then there are people that are in the chat saying that's just too vague, it's too amorphous, it's not, I need structure. Like, what is the structure? And it's sort of funny because, I mean, to your point, how do you partner with another person truly at a heart to heart, goodwill to goodwill way if you prescribe it? Hi, Lyssa here. I want to interrupt real quick and just say thank you for being a viewer on this channel. I very much appreciate you being here. And I'd also like to make an invitation to you. I love to meet people and have more one-to-one interactions with them. And to that end, I have a monthly coaching Q&A. We cover all kinds of topics, coaching related, and I would love to invite you, my treat, to that those monthly coaching sessions. You can find a link below, and I want to just say thank you, and I look forward to meeting you on a monthly Q&A soon. Cheers. And now back to your regularly scheduled programming.
Yes. Another way I talk about social therapeutics is that you develop a new conceptual toolkit that gives you the we lens. The era we live in now is the me lens, and it's gotten so entrenched that even, David Brooks is saying, hey, we have hyper individualism now, we're going too far. Even Adam Grant will say, The unit in companies is the team. It's not the individual.
Right.
So,
We found the INT, right? And if you don't get that joke, I'll have a picture of it on the webpage.
Yeah. So it's hard for people to make that shift, and it is uncomfortable. We are taught that we need to know first and we need structure. But our world now is so uncertain. No wonder we're all going crazy, because if we're out there looking for certainty, the world is like way more uncertain. That's how we're experiencing it. And we need new tools in order to, and what social therapeutics does, it's a toolkit that not only helps people navigate through uncertainty, as if you can just hold your breath and plug your nose and get to the other side, we're back to certainty. No, social therapeutics helps people create with uncertainty.
And I'm letting that sit there for a moment. Because I think I'm a creative. I mean, I have a background in art, and and so there's that element of creativity, but I'm also a maker. I'm just a maker of things. I just love that. That's my shtick. And yet there can be loneliness if that's the sole focus also. But it's this, again, the yes and. It is if we are so isolated in our focus on whatever, we miss the opportunity to understand things in new ways and to be able to be creative in uncertainty. Because, like you said earlier, we're more aware of the uncertainty. I don't think we're more uncertain in the world than we were, say, 5,000 years ago when, or 500 years ago when Vikings were pillaging your village or whatever. And I'm pretty sure I have Vikings in my background. So I say that with love. But I mean, I think uncertainty, we know about it in different ways now because we're so inundated with it. And I think and I'm curious, because I think there's probably a connection, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. But with all of the information about all of the uncertainty, how does that impact our withdrawal into loneliness as a protective quality, maybe even?
Well, I hear that question as a power question. I think we're feeling powerless. And so that's where we go. I'm just speaking like sort of broadly in America and many other parts of the world. I think this is,
Well, it's a survival strategy. It's a human thing, right? To move away from pain towards what feels safe. I mean, it doesn't even have to be pleasure. It's just safety.
yeah. We're in the middle of a conceptual shift right now. Actually, it turns out that studying humanism is relevant. People would always say, what the hell are you doing studying the Renaissance? Well, that period was the shedding of an old way of seeing and doing and feeling in the world, and the ushering in of what became the Enlightenment. But I studied that juicy early moment where it's like also very uncertain and lots of new things going on, people trying new things. I think, and I'm not alone in this, I think we're living in a moment like that now. The tools of the Enlightenment have served us very well, but they're not, the tools of the Enlightenment were custom made to produce certainty. And so and lots of people are talking about this. I don't know if you know Bob Anderson. He was he spoke at a Coaches Rising conference, and he said, look, the old order is dead. We can't go back. You can't go back to normal. And I heard him speaking methodologically. And we can kind of see that new ideas are emerging, because look at the growth of coaching, which is a non-cognitive based approach, meditation, yoga, even psychedelics. These are all non-cognitive, therapeutic psychedelics. These are all non-cognitive experiences that people are incorporating into their lives. So I think we're at the beginnings of going somewhere new as a species conceptually.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I think about like even in my own journey, I would, if you had asked me 20 years ago, what sort of therapy do you practice? I would have started with, I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist, right? Now,
Yeah.
I also did a lot of non-cognitive things along with that, EMDR and, mindfulness and things of that nature as well. But I think you're right. Like today, if you asked me what kind of coach am I, or if you asked me what sort of therapist I am, which I'm not, but if you did, I wouldn't, cognitive behavioral would not be the place that I would have gone to anymore, because I think it is a sort of a limit. And it's interesting in the interview that I had, that is right before this one. So like the interview right before you, I was talking with Dr. Boyatzis, and one of the things that he was talking about is how what they're learning through the research is like the grow model, or the whatever these sort of very formulaic models of moving people forward, they don't work. They're not enough. They don't last for sustainable changes. And I think that's what you're really speaking to. We've got to move beyond the old models. It's time for new models. And those require the actual human being to be a part of the creation of what they need in order to move forward, if I am understanding.
Yes. The life development groups that I lead, I do some short-term groups, but pretty often people say, hey, can we do this again? Does this have to end? These are groups that bring together diverse people with diverse issues they want to grow around. So there's no even illusion of sameness in any way. And what people discover is that that this is our group. We build this group. It's like the 90 minutes of their week where they're not consumers. They get to exercise their emotional, relational muscles. And it turbocharges growth and development. And my passion is I want everyone to be in a life development group. And I want to train everyone who wants to be trained in how to lead them, because we have to reignite those muscles, and you can't do it by yourself cognitively. We have to do it with others.
Well, and this is something that I remember from an early conversation with you, that, and I believe I'm going to attribute it to you. You can correct me if I'm
Okay.
wrong. But as I recall, we cannot solve the social issues that we have without addressing our relational issues, because we're a social species, and because you will not solve relational issues without actually having relationships. Like you can't solve it without dealing with the trauma that is often inflicted by it in actual relationships. So that kind of idea that I'll just go and work on myself separate from relationship, and then I'll be able to heal the relationship, there may be elements to that. But am I quoting you? I mean, misquoting you, kind of quoting
Oh,
you?
I think you're on point. And when people join my groups, they might start off by saying, I'm going to go process this, and then I'm going to come back to you and talk to you about a group. But over time, they start processing with the group, and that they discover is so much more helpful. They see so many other possibilities of how they might go forward in whatever their issue is.
This really brings up something. So I did relationship therapy for many years. I was a marriage couples coach, therapist, honestly. But I would say to people, look, I'm not a mind reader. You're not a mind reader. We need to ask in the moment, because how else will the other person know? And I honestly learned this not from some, and I had some great training with like Gottman and some of these other relational training organizations. I honestly learned it in relationship with my husband, where I would attribute something to him and he would be like, that sounds like an attribution. Could you ask? And I'd be like,
Ah,
okay, fine.
yeah,
Yes. All right. I think I'm making an assumption, and here's my assumption. And I would
yeah,
just ask, and he'd be like, yes, your assumption is correct. Or no, your assumption is incorrect. But I honestly learned it to your point in relationship, not
right.
in theory, but
Yes,
in practice.
yes. And there's I think one of the ways we can be powerful as coaches is to integrate relational questions in our work, because relationality is grounded in the sociality of our species, that we impact and are impacted on by each other. So a relational question, which I try to find a way to ask, especially in the first session with somebody, is what's it like for you to share this with me? And
That's a really interesting question.
that question engenders trust almost immediately, because it's recognizing we're doing something together. We're
I'm
doing
stealing that, just so you know, yours today, mine tomorrow, but I am definitely, I think that's so powerful because it is that partnership element as well. What is the experience of sharing this thing with me? Because I think it transcends the idea of what are you even learning about yourself in the moment that you're sharing it with yourself and saying it out loud, which I think is really relative and important also. But to your point, I may have never said this to myself. That means I've never said it to another human being with awareness. And what is
Exactly.
that?
Exactly, because it's like a form of presence that invites the client to explore new ways of thinking. And there are a gazillion varieties of that kind of question.
Yeah.
And that sets the stage for clients just seeing themselves as active participants and creators in their relationships, and including in it, we all impact on each other. And that impacts
Yeah.
emotionally too. I don't know if you've seen this book, Between Us by Batya Mesquita. And she's talking about, and others are talking about this too, and it's in my book practically, because we have lots of practical examples in the book, over 30, where emotions actually aren't really inside of us. They actually emerge in relation to others.
Well, and that goes into a lot of what Lyssa Barrett Feldman or Lisa,
Yes.
you know, her
Yes.
work that about the
Mhm.
how we construct emotional reactions and responses to things,
Yep.
which really goes into these ideas of resilience in my mind also, and this idea of like, if I have more resilience in this area, something happens there, my emotional response to it is going to be very different than if you have the same exact, we're in the same box having the same exact experience, but your resilience is different. You're going to have you might have more resilience and handle it much differently and better than I do. I may have less or different resilience and handle it differently as a result of my experience and what kind of internal structure and strength that I have in order to be able to use whatever that emotional muscle is, and also how I perceive it. There's some really interesting work, and I'm forgetting the name. I wasn't even thinking about this until now, around it's this, I'm going to say it wrong right now, but Satter-Whorf. Are you familiar with the theory around Satter-Whorf? So,
No.
and I'm saying it probably wrong. I'll write it correctly in the show notes, but it is the idea that how we talk about things impacts the way we think about things. And
Yeah.
so what you're talking about here is that also, right? Like if we think about something and how we're talking about it, this is horrible, awful, terrible, blah, 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 our emotional responses to it are going to be along that same line versus I've got this, I can do it, I can learn, I can grow. Failure's just a learning step, not a problem, right? Like that's going to shift everything emotionally as to how I see myself moving through whatever the space is that I'm moving through.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've talked about your book a bit, and I want to just sort of give people a little snippet really about your book that you wrote with Murray Dabby.
Mhm.
Combining social therapeutics with the practice of coaching, this book guides coaches and mental health professionals in how to coach groups and couples using this innovative method. And then it goes on to talk a little bit more about it in your kind of the blurb about your book. But I would love you to talk more about the book and what people learn from the book.
Yep. Well, the book is the first half of the book is more of the intellectual theoretical foundations, and the second half of the book is all practical. And I wrote the book thinking everyone should read it from the first page to the last page, but now that I'm training people, it's much better to jump around because so you can see what it looks like and feels like in practice. But there's the first chapters on a history of coaching, which was so delightful for me to learn about and learn these ways that the overlap, not only in that coaching and social therapeutics, came out of the social motion of the 60s and 70s. They were created outside of academic institutions and all of that. But also commitment to co-creation from day one, or the focus on building with what's emerging in the session, which requires not knowing.
Which is really, I mean, I don't know that people understand what a dramatic shift that is from the sort of therapeutic medical model, because they're in the medical model, you are not co-creating. You have an expert and you have a patient, and this kind of leveling out of co-creation and emergence is strikingly different.
Yes. And the focus on growth and transformation also, historically, at least back in the day when coaching and social therapeutics were created. And then, so it's taking people through how this fusion approach, the four pillars of which would be the works of Lev Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development, which I could say more about, fused with the tools of theater and improv, because they're kind of are similar. And when you fuse them together, it makes it really accessible for people to imagine stretching, going beyond themselves with others. So it's grounded in the sociality of our species. That's how we grow and develop as babies. We need others. Without them, we would not get very far.
Yeah, we might learn to walk, but it'll take us longer if we don't have a table.
Yeah, and speaking, so the classic example of what a ZPD is, a zone of proximal development, which is also how I my company, the ZPD Coaching, is that when a baby babbles, no adult throws them a grammar book and says, come back when you get this right.
that needs a comma.
Do that to each other as adults all the time.
Yeah, you've mispronounced that word.
Thankfully, with babies, we are more open to encouraging their development. And so, no, instead what happens is the baby babbles and the mother says, "Oh, honey, do you want some milk?" The mother or the parent or whatever adult person who knows how to speak relates to the baby as a head of itself. That's how babies learn how to speak. There's a classic video.
So stop real quick. Okay. Yeah. And I want to get the YouTube video in a second, but so just to break down the zone of proximal growth, I think it's really important to understand that there's three areas that you're moving through. There's an area that you can do this in your sleep. You don't need any help. It's an area that you excel, whatever it is. I can cook lasagna. I don't need any help to do it at this point. I know how to do it. Then there's an area that we move into as we're learning and developing where you need help. You need somebody. So the baby is trying to learn to walk. The baby is rolling around. They can do that by themselves at around 6, 7 months old. They're fine with that and they're turning over and that stuff. But in order to take that step into standing and walking, they often need fingers to hold on to, or a table or a chair or a leg or a something, right? So they need help. And in order to start to get it. And then there's the thing that they can't do at all. Like a year-old baby is probably not going to be skipping yet. Right? They just can't do it until they've learned to walk well enough and learn to do some other skills before they can really master that next level. So I wanted to share that because I'm not sure that everybody knows it as well as you do. And I wanted to kind of break it down real quick. So now go on.
Well, I'm glad you said that because it's reminding me, this is how Vygotsky was really ahead of his time and different than the concepts of the Enlightenment. So think of Piaget. We all, if you study psychology at all, you learn Piaget. Children, there are 4 stages of development. They are clearly defined. You can measure where they are, and you have to go linearly from one to the other. And it happens inside the baby. There's an Enlightenment concept. Somehow, miraculously, babies develop inside of themselves. Vygotsky was bringing a whole different conceptual toolkit to how he was seeing child development. So Piaget would be more Enlightenment me model. Vygotsky, although he was an early 20th century guy, was bringing tools that are more we based, that we need others to grow and develop, and we need others at different levels of development that we are at. Mm-hmm. And that these are activities that happen between people. Babbling is an activity. Pleading is an activity, you know, like the parent saying something actually real in English as if that was what the baby wanted to say. Milk. Performing ahead of yourself, a head taller is Vygotsky's language. That's an activity. So Vygotsky was seeing these activities between people as the foundation of human growth and development.
I have a great experience that I think aligns with this. You tell me, but I have 2 younger brothers, and the first younger brother, I don't think he could drink out of a water fountain. I'm going to just say till he was 4, because it took him that long, because, you know, parents are busy and you're just holding the kid and they're, you know, like, well, no, I don't like it. Water's going up my nose, all the stuff that a first kid's got to struggle through. Second brother, like by 2, he could totally drink out of a water bottle or a water fountain. And I think that's to your point, right? Where it's not just like, because they grew up in, well, nobody grows up in the same family, but they grew up in a similar enough family that if it was really that linear, all babies would learn how to drink out of a water fountain at 4. That's just a mile marker. Whereas it's not, because the second baby figured it out faster, right? Because they're modeling themselves on the larger social experience they're having.
So imagine bringing that into life development groups and into coaching in general, even in individual work, but in group work, there are some members of group that are more advanced in checking in with how the group is doing. There's somebody else in the group who's more advanced in this, and somebody else. And you know, on my best days, I'm more advanced than everybody in the group. Not always.
Not always myself.
and then people will imitate me and imitate this language. Oh, I really want to do a new performance at work. I don't want to do my same old way that I am. So and the relational questions also. People in group will now say, well, what's it like for you to be giving this very hard thing to all of us? And then they take that out into the world with each other.
I love that. I love that. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, then in your book, there's the science-y part of it at the beginning, the theory, the understanding of that this didn't just arrive in a lightning strike that just like here, like it came from some places, and this is the theory that built this idea. And then the second part of the book, which you are welcoming people to jump around the book, but the second part is really around how to apply this in more practical ways.
There's a chapter on, like, written to coaches, how to coach a group with, you know, what do you do with a silent person or someone who talks too much? So it's very practical like that. And then the next chapter is actual group scenes with a little bit of commentary at the end. So you can maybe see the method unfolding in the scene, but then in the commentary, we kind of say what the highlighted development and social therapeutic moments are. And I wanted to say that in reading your book, I really, really appreciate the way that you were you're teaching people through the excerpts and the dialogues. And And I hope that we are too in our book. And it's really hard to do because it's all process. Our work, our sessions are all process. So how do you put a spotlight and say to people, look at this moment and try to
Right.
understand what it means? So
Right.
really felt very close to you in reading and your examples. I think it's very challenging to do.
It, and I do think it's important. And part of the reason I think that it's important is, one, this is how we start to do the work of our own self-awareness of our own work, is we look at our transcripts and we start to break down the places where, oh, this is what's happening here. And was I ready to hear it, or did I not hear it yet? And so I missed it. And I mean, and so I think that part of the reason that I found that exercise in my own book, and I'm so glad you guys are doing this in your book as well, is showing these demonstrations, is because they are how we learn from ourselves, but also how we learn from others and how we share. Like, here's a moment to think about, like what you just shared earlier. Like, what was that experience like for you to share this insight with me? Because I don't think that is not something that would normally just come into my mind as I'm telling you something about myself. And yet the power in me, even having, because it's going to bring it into the somatics of it. What was the experience? Like, it was kind of
Yeah.
scary to share this for the first time, or it was it was lightening. Like, I just feel lightened as a result of sharing this and not being judged, or whatever it is that the experience is the person is having. And so in that way, from a coaching framework, we are partnering with the client's awareness and insight and
Yeah.
their own bodily awareness and autonomy and the somatics of it.
Yes.
And being, I'm sorry, one more thing, and being willing to sort of be an improv, because we don't know what they're going to say to us. So now I'm going to be quiet.
Oh, well, and also they don't know what they're going to say because they've never been asked a question like that before. So they're having the somatic experience of saying something that they don't know what's going to happen next. And it turns out, as in all good improv, your partner catches you.
Yeah, and plays with it and tosses it back and gives you something to work with. Doesn't toss you back nothing, but tosses you back something
Mhm.
that you can play with and toss back again. It's how we learn to play.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that's another thing that Vygotsky brings to the table. He was so passionate about children's play and pointing out that that is how children grow. And when we're young kids, remember when we made up the rules as we went along, when we kept
No,
going,
no, no, it's like
something didn't
this.
work,
No, 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 it's like
you know,
that.
it's like, can we bring that forward into our adult lives? It gets smushed out of us pretty early on, but if we can imitate that playfulness, we create more space. There's more room to be creative and innovative. There's more room for possibility to emerge. There's more connection, less evaluation in our heads, less judging, less measurement. Those are all the cognitive enlightenment tools. Less of that and more being able to improvisationally create together.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I want to ask a question, because it seems like you've had a vast experience of working with some pretty extraordinary people. Looking back, was there a piece of wisdom that you received that maybe initially you were sort of like, I don't know, but now it really is foundational to how your viewpoints and on how
Yeah.
you work?
Um, well, if I'm hearing your question correctly, as a young woman in the corporate world, it's still being the only woman in meetings back then, which probably still happens today. I had a mentor, a male mentor, who said to me, I probably asked him, like, how did you become successful or something? And he said, well, you just trust yourself. Just trust
Just
yourself.
do it.
And very helpful, because men are really good at navigating the business world, and I've learned a lot from them. But I couldn't, I mean, right over my head, had no idea. It took me another easily 15 years to trust myself, to trust my vision, my voice. Um, so I think that's a response to your,
I think it is. It's a
yeah,
beautiful one. And I think it really
yeah,
speaks to, I mean, we're constantly saying we give prescriptions for how do you trust yourself, but it's a process we have to go through. And I think you're right. Like I've been in corporate situations and I worked with the military and state
yeah,
governments and things like that. And there is a real difference. And maybe that's changing as these newer, younger generations of women are coming up with more agency to share their perspectives. But I think that it is a challenge to trust oneself. And I think maybe men are better at pretending, or
yes,
maybe the men that we're talking to are older and have already done that part of the journey. But I
mm,
think men are also trained from a young age to trust themselves more, and especially because they're usually doing sports more.
mm,
Not necessarily all men, but I think that those kinds of things of learning to trust your body, learning to trust the movements, recalibrating and then doing it again. And so I think there's some elements that may come in there that also put them slightly ahead of women in the trusting ourselves. Plus, I don't know, estrogen is probably tough on a teenage girl and trust. Those hormonal shifts. Um, I have a final question that I really love to ask people. And you've talked about so many things. That you may have already answered this. So I'm going to ask you to stretch yourself and like think about if there's a person or a book or a resource that you felt like was really particularly impactful in your growth and development as a coach and as a human being.
well, I worked to put myself in positions and places where people could teach me, and people very different from me could teach me. And I think that Fred Newman, the founder of the practice of social therapeutics, has profoundly impacted on me as a person and as a professional. And I realized in writing the book, that he taught me, what I learned from him was to be a methodologist. And
Mm,
he passed away in 2011. He was brilliant. He was a PhD in the philosophy of science from Stanford. He grew up in the South Bronx in a Jewish family, and he was funny, and he cared deeply and dedicated his life to creating tactics and methods and ways where people could express their decency. And that's had an absolute profound impact on my life. And I try to live that and practice that every day to empower people to discover their power to create and build.
yeah, I can feel that as you're talking about it.
Yeah.
And I have not heard of him, and so I will make sure to go
Yeah.
and find out more. He sounds like he is still extraordinary.
Yeah. He gave a lot to the world,
Yeah, it's,
to a lot of
and I
people.
to a lot of people, yeah. And you get to amplify it and move it forward in the way that you're sharing
Yes.
with the world
Me,
as well.
it's privilege, it's a terrifying privilege to practicalize, because they're founders. Founders do what founders do. They get off the ground. And now I'm like next generation. It was an honor and a privilege to try and practicalize that and give that away. The book is a giving away to coaches and the broader community of group and couples practitioners. And I hope people will use it.
Yeah, well, and I will have links to everything available for folks to find the books, to find out more about him, to find out more about you, to find you on LinkedIn. All the things will be there.
Yeah.
Carrie, it was such a pleasure to have you on the coaching studio today. I really am so grateful for your time.
Thank you, Lyssa. I've loved our conversation.